Hi guys, and welcome to the Gentle History podcast. Tonight we are stepping onto the open prairie in 1852, where the sky seems enormous, the grass bends under a cold wind, and your covered wagon creaks westward beneath a canvas roof that suddenly feels much thinner than it did yesterday. The morning looks ordinary at first. Frost clings to the wagon tongue. Your breath hangs pale in front of your face. Somewhere behind you, an ox snorts and stamps at the frozen ground. Then you notice the clouds. They sit low on the horizon, grey and heavy, gathering in a way that makes the older travellers glance upward more often than usual. Nobody panics. Out here, panic wastes energy, and you are going to need plenty of that because, realistically, you probably won't survive this if you decide weather warnings are merely decorative suggestions. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Maybe you're warm in London, awake late in Toronto, or listening somewhere in Australia while your own morning begins. Now, dim the lights and let the prairie stretch around you. Your wagon rolls slowly through a country that appears almost too open to be dangerous. There are no walls, no tall forests, and little to interrupt the wind. The horizon seems to circle you completely beneath an even broader sky. You walk beside the wagon because riding inside would only add unnecessary weight for the oxen. The ground is hard beneath your boots. Grass crunches softly where frost still lingers. Every few steps you hear the wooden groan of the wheels, followed by the faint clatter of cookware behind the bedding. For weeks those sounds have been comforting. Today they seem oddly loud. The wind has changed direction since dawn. It no longer drifts casually across the trail. It pushes. It catches your coat and presses the fabric against your body. It crawls under your collar and finds the small space between glove and sleeve. You pull your coat tighter. Someone farther ahead does the same. The wagon train continues west. One firmly established part of overland travel is that emigrants often had to judge weather without formal forecasts. There is no radio announcement, no glowing screen in your hand, and certainly no cheerful weather presenter pointing toward a swirling symbol over Nebraska. Travelers rely on experience, clouds, wind, temperature, animal behavior, and observations shared between families. Today, those observations are not encouraging. A man walking near the lead wagons pauses and studies the western sky. Another traveller notices, then another. Soon, the entire group begins checking the clouds. They are thicker now. The light has changed too. Morning sunshine does not disappear all at once. Instead, it fades behind a veil. Colours flatten. The prairie grass loses its golden tone and becomes dull brown. The canvas wagons ahead look pale against the darkening distance. You hear someone say that snow may come before evening. Another person says it will pass north. A third says nothing, which somehow sounds less reassuring than both opinions combined. Weather knowledge on the trail can be a peculiar mixture of careful observation and inherited folklore. Some travellers watch cattle closely, believing unusual restlessness may signal an approaching storm. Others notice birds, cloud shapes, or aching joints. One old trail belief claims that changes in campfire smoke can reveal shifting weather, although the wind currently blows smoke sideways so quickly that the fire appears to be attempting escape. You look toward the oxen. They seem less interested in meteorology than in finding something edible beneath the dry grass. Still, their heads remain low against the wind. By midday, the cold sharpens. It is not yet the deep cold that makes every breath hurt. It creeps through clothing slowly, beginning with fingers and toes, then settling into shoulders and knees. You rub your hands together. Your family has been travelling long enough to recognize the signs of an unpleasant day. Bedding that would normally remain packed is discussed. Firewood suddenly seems more valuable. Someone checks the wagon cover for loose ties. Nobody says blizzard yet, Besides, the prairie is still visible. You can still see wagons stretching ahead and behind. You can still see grass rolling toward the horizon. You can still make out a thin line of distant land beneath the clouds, for now. Historians still argue whether emigrants consistently understood just how quickly severe prairie storms could become dangerous, especially when written recollections were composed years later and memory reshaped frightening events into cleaner stories. What seems certain is that weather could transform an ordinary travel day with astonishing speed. And in 1852, timing matters. Thousands of emigrants are moving west during this era, many bound toward Oregon or California. The trail is no quiet wilderness path. At busy periods, it becomes a moving corridor of families, livestock, wagons, dust, campsites, and competing schedules. Everyone is watching the season. Leave too early and grass may be poor. Leave too late and winter may catch you. That calculation sits quietly beneath nearly every mile. You glance again toward the clouds. They're closer now. The wind carries a smell that is difficult to name. Cold air has a scent out here, dry and metallic, mixed with grass, leather, oxen, and smoke from distant wagons. A few tiny particles touch your cheek. You stop walking. Was that snow? You look upward. Nothing. Then another pale speck appears against your dark sleeve. It melts almost immediately. Ahead, someone lifts a hand. The wagons begin slowing. There is no shouting. Instead, the change moves from wagon to wagon through gestures and practical decisions. Drivers shorten distances, people check children, coats are buttoned, blankets are pulled closer to the front of wagons where they can be reached quickly. The most experienced travellers seem especially calm. That calm is not comfort, it is preparation. A woman near the next wagon tells her son to gather every loose scrap of wood he sees. The boy looks puzzled because they're supposed to be travelling, not collecting sticks. She tells him again. This time he moves quickly. You begin noticing the prairie differently. A fallen branch is no longer debris, it is heat. A sheltered hollow may be protection. A tightly tied canvas flap may be the difference between sleeping beside a draft and sleeping inside a wind tunnel made entirely of 19th century fabric. The first real snowflake lands on the wagon wheel. It remains there. A second follows, then a third. The oxen keep moving, patient and slow, their hooves pressing dark marks into the pale dusting beginning to collect on the trail. You walk beside them and listen. Wind, wood, leather, breathing. The ordinary music of the journey is still there, but something new has joined it. A faint whisper passes across the grass as snow begins to move sideways. You look west once more. The horizon is disappearing. The horizon does not return. Instead, the grey ahead thickens until distance becomes uncertain, and the quiet unease moving through the wagon train turns into work. Nobody wastes time discussing whether the weather is becoming unpleasant. That question has answered itself. You reach the wagon and place one hand against the canvas. The fabric snaps once in the wind, then presses inward against the wooden boughs. It has protected your family from dust, sun, and ordinary rain, but now you look at it with new suspicion. A loose tie is tightened. Then another. You check the seams where the canvas is stretched over the frame. Fingers already stiff from cold tug at ropes, knots, and straps. Anything that can flap is secured. Anything that can blow away is brought closer. The wagon suddenly feels less like transportation and more like a shelter that happens to have wheels. Across the train, other families are making the same transformation. Men and women move around wagons with blankets over shoulders and scarves wrapped around faces. Children are called back from the trail. Cooking pots are packed deeper inside. Water containers are checked. Axes are brought where they can be reached quickly. The wind strengthens. One of the most practical realities of overland travel is that emigrants carry nearly everything they expect to need for months. Food, tools, bedding, spare clothing, medicine, cooking equipment, and personal possessions all compete for limited space and weight. A wagon that feels crowded on a pleasant afternoon can become absurdly cramped once everyone wants shelter inside it. You begin rearranging. A flour sack moves toward the centre where it will stay dry. A box of clothing is pushed against the side, blankets are pulled out and shaken, one smells faintly of smoke. Another carries the dusty scent of weeks on the trail. You fold them loosely rather than packing them away. Tonight, they may be more valuable than almost anything else you own. Someone checks the firewood. The answer is not encouraging. There are a few split pieces, some branches collected earlier, and a bundle of smaller scraps. Out on the prairie, wood can be scarce, especially after many travellers have passed through the same corridor. So people gather what they can. Children search for sticks. Adults scan the ground for anything dry enough to burn. And then comes one of the stranger but very real features of prairie travel. Where timber is scarce, emigrants often burn dried buffalo dung commonly gathered from the plains and used as fuel. It may not sound romantic, but after enough cold miles, romance becomes less important than whether the coffee gets hot. A child near your wagon holds up a dry piece with great seriousness. Nobody laughs. That small object may become warmth. The trail teaches people quickly to stop judging useful things by polite standards. You take stock of the food next. Flour, bacon, coffee, perhaps beans, maybe dried fruit if your supplies have survived better than expected. Nothing looks luxurious, but luxury is not the issue. Warm food will matter, hot water will matter. Having enough fuel to heat either one may matter even more. A woman in your family wraps a smaller child in an extra layer of clothing before the cold becomes severe. Socks are checked, caps are found. Mittens that vanished beneath bedding suddenly become urgent treasures. You notice how preparation changes the mood. The children become quieter because adults are moving with purpose. Nobody wants to frighten them. But children notice everything. They hear the shorter voices. They see the repeated glances toward the sky. They understand that the ordinary rhythm of travel has been interrupted. An older traveller suggests angling the wagons so that the broadest force of the wind does not strike the canvas directly. Others discuss whether to bunch closer together. Too close, and animals, ropes, wheels, and drifting snow may create problems. Too far apart and reaching another family during worsening visibility becomes dangerous. Researchers continue to debate how standardized storm procedures were among emigrant wagon trains, because practices varied with experience, leadership, terrain, and circumstance. Diaries often describe improvisation rather than one universal method, so your group improvises. The wagons settle into a tighter arrangement. Animals are brought closer. Harness is inspected. Loose gear is secured beneath wagons or tied to frames. You help drive a stake deeper into hard ground, striking it with the back of an axe. The sound is sharp. Again. Again. The wind carries it away almost immediately. By now, snowflakes are appearing more often. They still do not fall thickly. They drift. A few catch in the grass. Some vanish on the wagon boards. Others stick to sleeves and hair. You look at the ground and imagine what it might look like in several hours. Tracks gone, ruts covered, landmarks hidden. A landscape that has guided you west simply erased beneath white. That possibility changes another decision. Water. Before the storm worsens, containers are filled where possible. Snow can eventually be melted, but melting snow requires fuel, and fuel is already precious. Every task begins connecting to another. Water needs heat, heat needs fuel, fuel needs collecting, collecting requires visibility. Visibility is fading. Suddenly the entire day feels like a chain, and the weakest link may become important at exactly the wrong moment. You check the wagon cover once more. A corner has loosened. You retie it. The rope is rough against your cold fingers. Inside, bedding is arranged along the sides. creating softer barriers between bodies and the thin exterior covering. Clothing needed tonight is placed where nobody must search for it in darkness. A lantern is checked, matches are protected. Any flame inside a canvas wagon will require caution. A popular trail tale claims that experienced emigrants could sense a storm by watching distant grass change colour beneath shifting light. Whether that skill was as reliable as later storytelling suggests is doubtful, but standing here now you can understand why people remember such signs. The prairie does seem to change colour. Brown becomes grey. Grey becomes pale. The edges of everything soften. Someone calls from the next wagon. They have extra fuel, another family has spare blankets. The offers pass quietly between camps. This is not charity performed for ceremony, it is survival practiced as routine. You carry 2 pieces of wood toward a neighbouring wagon, and return with a small sack of dried fuel. No one keeps careful score. The wind does that for you. At last there is little left to secure. You stand beside the wagon, shoulders raised against the cold, and look along the line. Canvas tops rock slightly. Oxen shift. People disappear inside shelters, then emerge again for one final task. The prairie is still visible, but only just. Snow begins collecting in the wagon ruts. You glance at your family. Blankets are ready. Food is close. Fuel is guarded. Canvas is tight. The animals are near. You have done what you can. And that is when the first steady curtain of snow begins to fall. The first steady curtain of snow begins gently enough that, for a few minutes, it almost seems beautiful. Large flakes drift through the grey air and settle on the wagon canvas, the oxen, the grass, and your sleeves. They soften the edges of everything they touch. The trail, so hard and brown beneath your boots earlier, begins turning pale. A child reaches out one mittened hand and catches a flake. For a moment there is wonder. Then the wind strengthens. The snow stops falling downward and starts moving sideways. It slips beneath coat collars. It gathers in eyelashes. It sticks to the wool around your shoulders and melts against your skin before another flake arrives. You lower your head and keep walking beside the wagon. The wheels continue turning. Slowly. Wood creaks under the load. Iron rims grind through dirt and growing snow. The oxen lean into their yokes with the patient resignation of animals that have already crossed more country than anyone should reasonably expect from them. Ahead, the wagons are still visible. 5, then 4, then perhaps 3. You blink snow from your eyes. The line is shrinking. Someone near the front calls for the train to tighten its spacing. The message passes backward. Stay close. Do not allow gaps. That instruction suddenly feels far more important than the usual commands about pace and distance. A well-established reality of travel on the central overland routes is that weather could erase familiar trail signs with alarming speed. Emigrants often follow deep wagon ruts, trampled ground, river crossings, landmarks, and the tracks of earlier groups. Snow could cover those guides, turning a road that had been obvious in the morning into a blank surface by afternoon. You look down. The ruts beside your boots are still visible. Barely. Snow settles into them first, creating 2 pale lines running west. A few minutes later, one disappears beneath drifting powder. You keep your eyes on the wagon ahead. Its white canvas blends almost perfectly with the air. Only the dark wheels and moving shapes of people beside it remain clear. Then those 2 begin to fade. The prairie, which normally makes you feel exposed beneath its enormous sky, now seems to be shrinking around you. The horizon is gone. The distant grass is gone. Even the nearest rise in the land has vanished. Your world becomes the wagon, the oxen, the person walking 20 steps ahead, and the sound of wind moving across canvas. There is something unsettling about losing distance. On a clear day, you can look miles ahead and imagine where you will camp. Now you cannot confidently see the next 100 yards. Someone jokes that at least nobody can complain about the scenery being repetitive. The joke earns a few tired smiles. Prairie humour has become practical equipment by this point in the journey. The snow grows thicker. You hear it brushing against the canvas with a soft, dry hiss, like handfuls of sand thrown gently against cloth. A traveller near you pulls a scarf higher over his mouth. Another walks close to the wagon wheel, using the vehicle itself as a guide. You begin doing the same. The cold is changing too. Earlier it was uncomfortable. Now it enters slowly through every weak point in your clothing. Your fingers feel stiff inside your gloves. Your toes begin to lose warmth. The skin along your cheeks tightens beneath the wind. You flex your hands and stamp your feet whenever the wagon slows. Movement keeps you warm, but movement is becoming harder. The snow on the ground deepens enough to cling around your boots. Each step requires slightly more effort. The oxen notice first. Their pace falls. The wagon wheel catches in a shallow rut hidden beneath snow and jolts sideways. You grab the wagon frame. Inside, a pot knocks against a wooden box. Everyone stops. A driver studies the ground, or tries to. The trail is nearly invisible now. What looks smooth might hide a rut, a hole, frozen mud, or uneven ground. Moving blindly with a loaded wagon is not bravery. It is a very expensive way to break something, and almost everything that can break is something you need. One curious piece of trail folklore claims that some travellers judge snowfall by watching how quickly tracks vanished behind them. It's difficult to know how widespread such habits really were, but you understand the instinct. When instruments are limited, people turn observation into measurement. You glance backward at your own footprints. They are filling rapidly. Within minutes they are soft depressions. Soon after that they disappear entirely. A murmur passes through the group. Should you keep going? Stopping too early costs miles. Stopping too late may cost far more. This is the sort of decision that sounds simple when told later beside a warm stove. Out here, nothing about it is simple. Some scholars continue to debate how frequently emigrant companies pressed onward in severe weather, when they would have been safer stopping earlier, partly because surviving diaries often emphasize dramatic judgment calls, while ordinary caution leaves less memorable evidence. Your own train does not have the luxury of studying future arguments. You have snow in your eyes and a wagon wheel sitting crooked in a hidden rut. The lead wagons stop. The movement ripples backward. One wagon slows, then the next, then yours. The oxen stand breathing heavily, steam rising around their faces. For several moments, nobody says much. Wind moves over the prairie. Snow collects against boots and wheels. Then people begin working. Drivers guide wagons closer together. Animals are kept near their teams. Families check that children remain inside or beside known adults. A rope is stretched between two wagons so nobody has to trust sight alone if visibility worsens. That rope looks almost ridiculous in daylight. Now it seems brilliant. You take several careful steps away from the wagon. 5 paces. 10. Already the canvas behind you looks faded. You stop and turn back immediately. The wagon emerges from the white like a pale ship appearing through fog. Inside, someone lifts the canvas flap. There is not much warmth yet, but the dim interior looks sheltered, familiar, enclosed. Outside, the entire prairie has become motion. Snow crosses the ground, snow crosses the air. Snow catches on ropes, spokes, coats, and the backs of animals. The wagon ruts vanish completely. You can no longer point to the road. You can only remember where it was. The decision is made. No more miles today. The animals are halted, the wheels are secured, people call to neighbouring families, checking positions before the storm grows worse. You stand beside the wagon one final moment and listen to the canvas snapping above you. The journey west has stopped. Not because anyone reached a river, not because an axle broke, not because the sun is setting. The prairie itself has simply closed the road, and as you climb toward the shelter of the wagon, The white world behind you begins disappearing altogether. You pull yourself beneath the canvas, and the white prairie disappears behind the flap. The change is immediate, not warmth exactly, certainly not comfort, but enclosure. After standing in wind that seems determined to explore every opening in your clothing, the wagon feels strangely protected. The canvas above you shudders with each gust, and cold air still slips through small gaps. Yet the violence of the weather becomes muffled. Outside, the storm owns the prairie. Inside, you have perhaps 50 square feet of crowded civilization. There are blankets, boxes, sacks, coats, boots, cookware, tools, and several human beings attempting to occupy the same limited space without elbowing one another into the flour. You begin rearranging everything again. What seemed sensible this morning no longer works. The bedding needs to move. Heavy boxes are pushed toward places where they can help block drafts. Folded blankets are placed along the lower sides of the wagon, especially where cold air enters near the wagon bed. Spare clothing becomes insulation. A wool coat that nobody's wearing is tucked against a gap. A folded shawl covers another. You press your hand along the edge of the canvas and feel cold air pushing inward. There. Another opening. Someone stuffs a piece of cloth into it. The draft weakens. Victory. Not a heroic victory worthy of paintings or monuments, perhaps, but on a night like this, defeating one narrow stream of freezing air feels remarkably satisfying. One dependable fact about covered wagons is that their canvas coverings were designed primarily to provide shade and protection from ordinary weather, not to function like the insulated walls of a modern house. Families travelling west had to improvise when conditions became severe. You're discovering that very quickly. The canvas is only a barrier. Everything else must be created from what you have. You spread bedding carefully. A thick quilt goes beneath you because the wagon floor is cold enough to steal heat from the body. Another blanket is placed over the top. Someone suggests doubling the layers near the sides. Another person argues that more should go underneath. Both ideas have merit. Cold surrounds you from every direction, and your supply of blankets is not infinite. The solution becomes a compromise, some beneath, some beside, some above. You sit for a moment and immediately notice the difference. The wooden floor no longer feels quite as sharp through your clothing. The storm continues pressing against the wagon, canvas snaps, ropes strain. Snow makes a faint brushing sound along the exterior. Every gust causes the wagon covering to breathe inward and outward, as though the whole shelter possesses enormous lungs. You watch it move above you. This is not especially reassuring. Still, the boughs supporting the canvas hold. The ropes remain tight. The wagon stays upright. For now, that is enough. Everyone removes wet outer layers where possible. This has to be done carefully. Clothing dampened by melting snow can become a serious problem in cold weather, especially once movement stops and the body produces less heat. Wet gloves are rubbed. A scarf is shaken. Snow is brushed from shoulders before it can melt into the fabric. You begin to understand something simple. Staying warm is not one action. It is dozens of small actions repeated constantly. Keep dry, block wind, protect hands, protect feet, share blankets, avoid wasting heat, notice problems early, then do all of it again. A curious little detail from emigrant life is that families sometimes use virtually every soft household item available for bedding or insulation, including quilts brought for future homes, spare dresses, shawls, rugs, and even folded pieces of cloth originally packed for entirely different purposes. Tonight, sentiment becomes practical. A quilt that may have been stitched by relatives far behind you is no longer merely a reminder of home. It is a wall. You tuck it along the wagon side and press your shoulder against it. The fabric smells faintly of smoke, dust, and stored clothing. For a moment, beneath all that trail scent, you imagine you can still detect the house where it was packed months ago. Perhaps that is only memory. You allow yourself to believe it anyway. The family settles closer together. At first, everyone tries to preserve personal space. This lasts approximately 30 seconds. Then another gust pushes cold through the wagon, and suddenly personal space becomes a luxury for people living in buildings. You move closer, shoulders touch, knees overlap, blankets are shared. Body heat begins doing what no piece of equipment can manage alone. The air under the layered bedding slowly feels less severe. You can still see your breath, but not as clearly. Someone whispers that this arrangement would be considered very cozy if the wagon were not currently being attacked by an entire weather system. You smile. The humour helps. There is still disagreement among historians about exactly how families arranged wagon interiors during sudden severe storms, because surviving accounts often describe hardship and weather without giving detailed diagrams of sleeping positions, baggage placement, or every improvised insulation method. That leaves room for variation, and your family certainly has variation. One person wants the canvas flap sealed as tightly as possible. Another insists that some ventilation must remain. The second argument wins. A completely sealed space might feel warmer, but air still needs to circulate, especially if any small source of heat or light is used later. So a narrow opening remains. Not enough to welcome the storm, just enough to let the wagon breathe. You test the bedding again. Better. Your feet are wrapped. Your coat is folded beneath one shoulder. A rolled blanket blocks the gap near the tailgate. Another layer hangs from the side like a soft interior curtain. The wagon now looks less like a vehicle and more like a nest built by people with very limited architectural training. And yet it works. Slowly, gradually, almost reluctantly. Warmth begins collecting. Not summer warmth, not fireplace warmth. Just the precious difference between unbearable cold and manageable cold. You place your hand beneath the blanket and feel heat trapped there. That tiny pocket seems miraculous. Outside, the wind rises again. The canvas bows inward. Everyone goes quiet. You listen. A rope creaks. Wood shifts. The wagon rocks slightly on its wheels. Then it settles. No tear in the canvas, no broken bow, no sudden rush of snow. Conversation begins again. The interior grows dim as afternoon light fades behind the storm. You can no longer tell where the sun is. Time becomes measured by cold, hunger, and the changing sound of wind. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders. Someone beside you does the same. The walls are still canvas. The floor is still wood. Snow is still gathering outside, but within this cramped little space, surrounded by quilts, coats, sacks, familiar voices and shared warmth, the wagon has changed. For the first time today, it does not feel like something carrying you west. It feels like a home. The wagon feels like a home now, but the world beyond it is disappearing. You notice the change first through sound. The wind no longer comes in occasional gusts. It becomes continuous. A broad rushing voice moving across the prairie without pause. Snow brushes against the canvas in soft waves, then strikes harder whenever the wind shifts. The wagon rocks slightly beneath you, settles and rocks again. Someone lifts the canvas flap. Cold air pours inside at once. For a heartbeat you see nothing but white. Not falling snow, not distant snow, white everywhere. The nearby wagon that stood only a short distance away has almost vanished. You can make out a dark shape where one wheel should be. Then even that disappears behind another sheet of blowing snow. The flap drops closed. Everyone is quiet. A few hours ago the prairie seemed endless. Now your world is perhaps 20 feet wide. That is one of the strange tricks of a blizzard. It does not merely cover the landscape, it removes distance itself. You can no longer judge where the horizon ends because there is no horizon. Ground and sky have become the same pale colour. Snow moves sideways so quickly that even the surface beneath your boots can become difficult to distinguish from the air in front of you. One well-documented reality of severe plains weather is that loss of visibility could become as dangerous as the cold itself. Travellers could become disoriented only a short distance from camp, especially when wagon tracks, grass, streams, and other familiar features vanished beneath drifting snow. The idea seems almost ridiculous while sitting inside your own wagon. How could anyone become lost 10 or 20 yards from shelter? Then someone needs to check the oxen. Suddenly the question becomes very real. A man from the neighbouring wagon calls through the storm. His voice sounds strangely distant. You answer. He calls again. This time the wind swallows half the words. You pull on your outer coat, wrap your scarf high across your face, and prepare to step outside. Before you do, a rope is tied around your waist. The other end remains secured to the wagon. Nobody laughs. You open the flap. The cold hits your eyes first. Snow scratches against your cheeks. You lower your head and step carefully onto ground that no longer looks like ground. Your boot sinks deeper than expected. Already snow has begun collecting around the wheels. You take another step, then another. The wagon remains behind you. You know that. You can feel the rope, but when you turn your head, the canvas is almost invisible. The sight produces a small, unpleasant tightening in your chest. You continue. 5 steps. 6. The wind pulls at your coat. You cannot walk in a straight line without concentrating. A shape appears ahead. An ox. Its back is coated with snow. The animal stands with its head lowered, presenting as little surface as possible to the wind. Ice gathers along the hair near its face. You reach out and touch its shoulder. Warmth exists beneath the hide. The animal shifts slightly. That simple movement is reassuring. You call toward the others. A voice answers somewhere to your left. You cannot see the speaker. The prairie has become a room with no walls and no visible doors. A curious detail found in some accounts of winter travel is that people sometimes stretched ropes between shelters, wagons, or important points in camp, so they could move through poor visibility without losing direction. It sounds almost theatrical when described later, but standing in this white confusion, the usefulness is obvious. You follow the rope back, hand over hand. One glove slides along the coarse fibres. The line leads you toward a shape that slowly emerges from the storm. Your wagon. Only when your hand touches the wooden frame do you realize how tense your shoulders have become. You climb inside. Someone brushes snow from your coat. Another person pulls the blanket back round your legs. The wagon interior now feels astonishingly intimate. Every face is close. Every object has a known position. The walls may be thin, but at least you can see them. Outside, sound becomes your map. A shout from the next wagon tells you the family is still there. A cowbell somewhere beyond it tells you livestock have not wandered too far. A creaking wheel means one wagon is shifting slightly in the wind. The snap of canvas tells you another shelter is taking the same punishment as yours. At intervals, people call out simply to confirm that they can still hear one another. No important message. No new emergency. Just voices. Here. Still here. You answer. The words are simple, but they create a kind of invisible village across the storm. Researchers continue to disagree about how often emigrant companies used formal systems for staying connected during severe weather, since surviving journals describe everything from careful camp organization to hurried improvisation. What seems clear is that wagon train survival often depended on people adapting quickly to local conditions, rather than following one fixed procedure. Your group is certainly adapting now. Another rope is stretched toward a neighbouring wagon. A second line leads toward the nearest animals, not to check twice. No one wants a line coming loose in darkness. Children are told not to leave the wagon under any circumstances. The instruction is repeated, then repeated again. One child asks what would happen if someone did go outside alone. Nobody answers directly. An adult simply says, "You stay where we can find you. That is enough." The child pulls the blanket closer. The storm thickens. Snow begins pushing beneath the lower edge of the wagon cover in tiny grains. You wipe it away with your glove. More appears. The wind is finding every weakness. You press another folded cloth into the gap. For a while, it holds. The light outside changes from grey to darker grey, though you cannot tell whether evening is truly approaching or the storm is simply becoming denser. Time is difficult to measure now. You could check a watch if someone carries one, but the weather seems to have created its own clock. There is before the storm, there is inside the storm, and eventually you hope there will be after it. For now, there is only this. Canvas shaking, snow whispering, wind roaring, a nearby voice calling through the white. You lean toward the wagon opening and listen. There it is again, someone asking whether everyone is secure. You answer loudly. Yes. A second voice replies from farther away. Another answers after that. The sounds come through the storm like small lights you cannot see. You sit back beneath the blankets. Outside, the prairie has vanished completely. The road is gone. The sky is gone. Even the neighbouring wagons exist mostly as sounds and remembered positions. But the rope remains tied. The voices remain near. And inside your narrow canvas shelter, surrounded by family and familiar objects, you begin to understand that when sight disappears, survival depends on whatever connections you can still feel. The connections you can still feel begin to matter in another way when someone looks toward the small supply of fuel. There is not much. That fact has been waiting quietly beside you since the storm began. A few pieces of split wood rest near the wagon. Some smaller branches lie wrapped beneath canvas. There is dried prairie fuel collected earlier, along with chips and scraps that would have seemed almost worthless on a warm afternoon. Now every piece has a future. Warm water, hot food, a little heat, perhaps a few more comfortable hours before morning. You do not need a ledger to understand the problem. If you burn too much now, you may have nothing later. If you burn too little, everyone grows colder while perfectly good fuel remains unused. So you begin with patience. Outside the wagon, in the most sheltered place you can manage, a small fire is prepared where the wind cannot strike it directly. The location is chosen carefully. Canvas and flame are dangerous neighbours, especially when gusts can throw sparks in unpredictable directions. Someone clears snow. Another person shields the spot with a board and part of the wagon frame. You crouch low, your coat pulled tight, while a small bundle of tinder is placed beneath thin pieces of dry fuel. The match is struck. For 1 second, nothing happens. Then a tiny flame appears. Everyone watches it as if it has personally promised to save civilization. The flame bends sideways, almost dies, returns. You cup your hands around it without getting too close. A second piece catches, then a third. The fire is alive. Not impressive, not dramatic, but alive. A solid historical reality of overland travel is that wood was not always available in useful quantities along open stretches of the plains. Emigrants learned to burn whatever suitable fuel the landscape offered, including dried buffalo dung, often called buffalo chips, which could burn surprisingly well when properly dried. You hold one now. It is light, dry, and not remotely what you imagined yourself valuing when the journey began. Months ago, perhaps you pictured mountains, rivers, sunsets, and brave westward travel. You probably did not picture crouching in a snowstorm and thinking fondly about dried animal waste. History can be very inconsiderate toward romance. The first chip goes onto the small fire. Smoke curls upward and is immediately flattened by the wind. The smell is earthy, smoky, and not quite as terrible as a person unfamiliar with prairie fuel might expect. That may be the evening's most encouraging surprise. The fire strengthens enough to heat a small pot. Snow is gathered carefully and placed inside. At first it seems generous. A pot full of snow should make a pot full of water. It does not. The snow collapses as it melts, leaving a disappointing amount at the bottom. More is added. then more. The process requires heat, and heat requires fuel. Again, everything connects. You begin to think of every flame as something purchased. A little wood buys hot water, a dried chip buys warmer hands, a handful of twigs buys a cup of coffee. Waste nothing. Inside the wagon, people take turns warming fingers near the heat when it is safe to do so. No one remains beside the fire longer than necessary. The warmth is shared. You extend your hands toward the flame. At first, your fingers hurt as sensation returns. Then they soften. You turn your palms. The heat feels enormous, even though the fire could fit beneath a cooking pot. One old piece of trail lore says that travelers sometimes became so skilled at judging dried buffalo chips that they could tell which pieces would burn best almost at a glance. Whether every emigrant developed such expertise is doubtful, but after enough evenings cooking over whatever the prairie provides, you can imagine people becoming surprisingly particular about their fuel. You certainly are now. Dry pieces go into one pile, questionable pieces go into another. Anything damp is kept near warmth so it may become useful later. A few precious wood fragments are saved rather than burned. They are too valuable. The fire is fed slowly, never enough to roar. A large flame would feel comforting, but it would consume the night in minutes. Instead, you maintain a low, stubborn heat, a tiny orange center, dark fuel around it, occasional sparks. The storm tries to take it. You keep it anyway. There is continuing debate among scholars over how often emigrants facing severe cold deliberately rationed fuel hour by hour, since personal journals tend to record shortages and hardship more often than the exact rhythm of each fire. Yet practical necessity leaves little mystery about the basic calculation. Fuel is survival measured in handfuls. You understand this without writing it down. Someone brings a small metal container holding embers from a neighbouring family's fire. This is treated with enormous care. A living ember can save matches and time. It can restart heat after a flame fades. In a storm, that glowing coal becomes almost like a shared tool. You place it among the darker fuel. The ember brightens. Breathing gently near it, you watch orange spread along one edge. There, another flame. The satisfaction is ridiculous. You grin anyway. The children watch from inside the wagon opening. They're warned not to come closer. One asks whether the fire is going to stay alive all night. An adult answers that you're going to help it. That answer sounds better than making promises to the weather. The pot finally produces enough hot water for everyone to take a little. A cup passes from hand to hand. Steam rises. You wrap both palms around it before drinking. Heat moves through the metal and into your fingers. The water tastes faintly smoky. It is wonderful. Nothing has been added. No sugar, no spice, no miracle medicine. Just warmth. You swallow slowly and feel it travel down into your chest. For a moment, the entire storm seems farther away. The fire is fed again. One small piece. Then another. You begin setting aside the driest fuel for later, when the temperature may fall further. The rest is protected beneath canvas. Snow cannot be allowed to soak it. A fuel pile that becomes wet is not a fuel pile, it is decoration. The wind rises suddenly and sends powder swirling beneath the wagon. Everyone shields the flame. It shrinks to a glowing red patch. You wait. A tiny tongue of orange returns. Then another. The fire survives. That becomes the pattern. Guard, feed, wait, warm, save. Outside, the blizzard continues without concern for your efforts. Inside and beside the wagon, however, you are creating something the storm cannot easily provide or remove. A few degrees of warmth, a hot cup, a glowing ember, a small orange light against an entire white prairie. And as darkness deepens beyond the canvas, you begin to understand why nobody looks at the little fire and calls it small. Nobody calls the fire small, and the children seem to understand why. They watch the glow through the wagon opening until the flap is lowered again, and the orange light disappears. At once, the interior returns to its dim grey world of blankets, coats, shadowed faces, and the steady breathing of people packed close together. The youngest child asks whether morning is coming soon. Nobody answers immediately. Outside, the wind is still roaring with enough confidence to suggest that morning has not been consulted. Someone finally says that morning always comes. That answer seems satisfactory. The child settles deeper beneath the blankets. Inside the wagon, warmth has become something you build with bodies as much as fuel. Children are placed toward the safest and warmest part of the bedding, away from the worst drafts. Their boots are checked. Damp socks are replaced if dry ones remain. Small hands disappear beneath quilts, and caps stay on heads that would normally be uncovered indoors. There is no indoors anymore. There is only inside the wagon and outside the wagon. A familiar fact about 19th century overland migration is that many children travelled west with their families, sometimes walking large portions of the route and helping with everyday chores. They gathered fuel, carried water, watched younger siblings, and performed whatever small tasks their age allowed. Tonight, however, the trail asks less from their legs and more from their patience. That may be harder. Children are not designed to remain motionless simply because the weather has become historically significant. One shifts beneath the blankets. Another complains that someone is touching his foot. The accused child denies everything. You remind them that there are only so many places for feet to go. This produces several seconds of silence. Then somebody whispers that the wagon smells funny. That observation is difficult to dispute. The interior carries the combined scent of wool, damp leather, canvas, old smoke, flour sacks, boots, human bodies, and everything else that has been travelling west for months. Nobody would purchase a candle with this fragrance. Still, it means shelter. A small game begins. One child tries to name things that can be heard outside. Wind, canvas, an ox, a rope creaking, snow brushing the wagon. Another child says wolves. Everyone listens. There are no wolves. The child insists they are probably being quiet. You decide not to encourage further zoological speculation. Instead, someone tells a story. Not an exciting story. Excitement is not particularly useful when children are supposed to become sleepy inside a wagon that sounds as though it may sail away. The story is about home, a kitchen, a garden, a tree near a fence, a neighbour who owned a very rude rooster. The children know the story already. That is exactly why it works. Familiar details make the wagon feel connected to somewhere beyond the storm. One child interrupts to insist the rooster was not rude. It was evil. This distinction is treated with great seriousness. You smile into the darkness. A curious feature of emigrant recollections is how often small domestic memories survive beside accounts of major hardship. People remembered meals, jokes, songs, lost toys, stubborn animals, and ordinary family habits with remarkable clarity. Great journeys are often stored in memory through surprisingly small things. Perhaps tonight will be remembered that way too. Perhaps as the night someone stole all the blanket. The accusation arrives quietly. A child near the wagon side has somehow rolled himself into several layers and now resembles a very comfortable bundle of laundry. The blankets are redistributed, justice returns for approximately 2 minutes. Then someone wants water. The cup is passed carefully, only a little. There's enough for drinking, but nobody wants it spilled into the bedding. Wet blankets in this cold would be a genuine problem. The child drinks and asks for more. You promise another sip later. This produces a sigh normally associated with people denied great wealth. The storm continues. Every strong gust makes the children look upward. The canvas bows. The wagon creaks. Adults keep their voices calm. This is a quiet form of work. You do not tell the children every concern. You do not discuss the shrinking fuel pile in front of them. You do not speculate about whether snow is burying the wheels. Instead, you ask whether anyone remembers the song sung 3 nights ago. Someone begins softly, another voice joins. The tune is simple. Soon the wagon contains a thin thread of music beneath the much larger sound of the wind. Some historians continue to examine how children experience long overland journeys, since many surviving accounts were written later in life, and childhood memories can mix fear, adventure, family storytelling, and hindsight. What appears repeatedly, though, is that children could experience the same event very differently from the adults protecting them. You can feel that difference tonight. To you, the storm is a list of risks: fuel, cold, animals, canvas, food, mourning. To a child beneath the blanket, the storm may simply be loud. It may become a game. It may be the night everyone slept unusually close together. It may be remembered because someone told the story about the terrible rooster. The youngest child asks whether the wagon can blow away. You consider the question. You could say no. But the wind chooses that moment to strike the canvas so hard that the entire wagon gives a small shudder. A false answer would have poor timing. So you say that the wagon is heavy, the wheels are secured, and everyone has checked it carefully. That is true. The child accepts this and closes her eyes. You pull the blanket higher around her shoulders. Her face is still visible. So is a little cloud of breath. Another child lies awake beside her, watching the canvas move. You ask what he is thinking about. He says breakfast. This is encouraging. Planning breakfast suggests confidence in mourning. You ask what he wants. Pancakes. An ambitious request. You tell him the wagon train will inform the prairie immediately. He gives a sleepy laugh. The laughter fades. The game ends. The song is forgotten halfway through another verse. One by one, the children become quieter. A small hand remains outside the blanket until you tuck it beneath the wool. Someone turns over. Someone murmurs a word you cannot understand. The smallest child finally sleeps. You sit near them and listen. Outside is wind, cold, snow, darkness, and a prairie that no longer has a visible road. Inside is warmth gathered carefully beneath layered quilts. The children breathe in slow rhythms. Adults exchange glances above them. No speeches are needed. For now the children are warm. For now they feel safe. And for the adults sharing this cramped shelter, that may be the most important victory of the night. The fire can be small, the wagon can be crowded, the storm can continue. As long as the children remain beneath the blankets, warm enough to complain about breakfast, the night still feels manageable. The children remain quiet for several minutes, and in that brief peace, hunger finally becomes impossible to ignore. It has been waiting patiently beneath everything else. The wind demanded attention first, then the canvas, then the fire, then the children. Now your stomach reminds you that surviving a storm is much easier when the people doing the surviving have eaten something. Someone reaches for the food supplies. The movement is careful because the wagon is crowded, and nearly every useful object seems to be hidden behind another useful object. A sack is shifted, a blanket is lifted, a wooden box is opened. Inside are the familiar staples that have followed you west for months. Flour, bacon, coffee, beans, perhaps a little cornmeal, maybe dried fruit if your family has managed the supplies well. Tonight it looks magnificent. A firmly established feature of Oregon trail life is that emigrants depended heavily on durable foods that could survive long travel. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, rice, dried fruit, and similar staples appear again and again in trail accounts, because they could be packed, rationed, and prepared with relatively simple equipment. The problem tonight is not deciding what would taste good. The problem is deciding what can be cooked without consuming too much fuel. Every extra minute of flame has a cost. A large supper might warm everyone beautifully now and leave you shivering later. So the meal becomes modest, a little bacon, a simple flour mixture, hot water, coffee for the adults if there is enough. The beans are considered and rejected because they would take too long. The beans must wait for better weather. A small pan is brought near the fire. The bacon goes in first. Almost immediately the smell changes everything. Fat begins to sizzle. The sound is tiny beneath the roar of the blizzard, yet everyone notices. Children who are supposedly drifting towards sleep become interested again. One small face appears above a blanket, suddenly interested again. The scent moves through the wagon, smoky and salty, mixing with wool and canvas. For several minutes, the interior feels almost cheerful. The bacon provides something else that matters: grease. Nothing useful is wasted. A little flour can be mixed with the rendered fat and water to make a plain, filling preparation. Perhaps there is enough for simple biscuits or rough cakes, depending on what can be managed near the fire. Tonight, perfection is unnecessary. Warm and filling are enough. One charming oddity from trail cooking is that emigrant recipes often depended less on precise measurements than on experience. A handful of this, enough water for that, cook until it looks right. Measuring cups would be rather ambitious when your kitchen is a wagon, your table is a box, and the prairie is attempting to bury the entire establishment. You watch someone mix flour with practiced hands. The dough is rough, a little salt is added. Someone asks whether there is sugar. There is. Someone else asks whether sugar should be wasted on supper. The word wasted causes debate, but morale has its own mathematics. A little goes in, and the children approve. Outside, the fire must be watched constantly. Snow blows toward it. A board shields one side. A person kneels near the flame and feeds it only what is needed. The pan is held where the heat is strongest. Smoke curls under the shelter, catches in your throat and drifts toward the opening. Your eyes water. This is the less poetic side of frontier cooking, where a change in wind can leave everyone coughing. You adjust the shelter. The smoke shifts. Better. The first pieces of food are ready. They're passed inside. Nobody eats immediately. The portions are divided, children first, then adults. You receive something warm enough to heat your fingertips through the metal plate. You take a bite. It is simple, yet somehow it tastes better than meals you remember from comfortable rooms. Hunger helps, and relief helps most of all. There's active discussion among historians about how closely emigrant families followed planned ration schedules when weather, illness, delays, or animal problems disrupted travel. Diaries and guidebooks offer intended quantities, but lived practice could change quickly when circumstances became difficult. Tonight, your own ration plan is flexible. You conserve. But you also understand that people need enough food to stay warm and useful. A body that has spent hours fighting cold requires energy. So another small portion is prepared. Hot water follows. Snow is melted again, collapsing into far less liquid than its volume promised. You add more, then more. The pot finally gives you enough. Coffee grounds are measured carefully. The adults look at them with the seriousness of people handling medicine. Coffee on the trail is not merely flavor, it is routine, it is warmth, it is the smell of morning and campfires and familiar habits carried across unfamiliar country. The drink is weaker than anyone would prefer. Nobody complains. A cup passes to you. Steam touches your face. You hold it near your nose for a second before drinking. The aroma is dark and comforting. The first swallow is hot enough to make you pause. Then warmth moves through your chest. You feel your shoulders relax. For a few moments, the blizzard becomes background noise. The children receive warm water, perhaps sweetened slightly if supplies permit. One child manages to spill a few drops. Every adult looks toward the bedding immediately. The child freezes. The spill has landed on a wooden box. Relief. Someone wipes it away. You explain gently that tonight the blankets must remain dry. The child nods as though entrusted with military information. The meal continues. Bites become slower. Conversation becomes softer. Someone remembers a supper from home, someone else mentions fresh bread. This is considered cruel. Fresh butter is mentioned next. Now everyone protests. You agree to stop discussing food that does not currently exist. The laughter is quiet. It feels good. The last pieces are eaten. Grease is saved. The pan is scraped clean. Water is not wasted washing more than necessary. Every object returns to its place. Outside, the little fire dims again. Inside, stomachs are fuller, hands are warmer. The children settle beneath the blankets once more. The storm has not weakened. Snow still presses against the wagon. Wind still pulls at the canvas. But supper has changed the atmosphere. You're no longer simply enduring cold. For a short while you have cooked, shared, teased one another, argued about sugar, guarded the coffee, and performed the ordinary ritual of eating together. That ordinary ritual feels enormous tonight. You pull the blanket over your legs and listen as the last cup is set aside. The wagon smells faintly of bacon and smoke. Someone beside you sighs, not from fear, from fullness, and beyond the thin canvas, while the prairie disappears beneath snow, your small moving home holds the quiet warmth of a family that has managed to make supper in the middle of a blizzard. The warmth of supper lingers longer than the food itself. For a little while you can still feel the hot coffee in your chest and the heat from the small fire on your hands. The wagon smells of smoke, wool, bacon, damp leather, and people who have spent far too many months sharing a space originally designed to carry possessions rather than an entire sleeping household. Then darkness settles completely. There is no sunset to watch, no orange horizon, no last strip of daylight beneath the clouds. The storm simply turns from grey to black. Someone checks the wagon opening one final time, then lowers the canvas securely. The interior becomes almost completely dark except for the faint glow of a carefully protected lantern. Even that light is used sparingly. Fuel matters. Everything matters. You ease yourself deeper beneath the quilts. The bedding is arranged as tightly as possible around everyone. Shoulders press against shoulders. Feet search for warm spaces without accidentally finding someone else's face. There is a quiet negotiation over knees. One child has somehow acquired more blanket than physics should permit. Again, the excess is gently reclaimed. Then everyone attempts the great frontier achievement of becoming comfortable inside a wooden box while a blizzard pounds against it. A widely recorded reality of overland travel is that many emigrants slept in tents, beneath wagons, beside campfires, or inside wagons when circumstances demanded it. Space was limited, and most healthy adults often walked during the day rather than riding, partly because wagons were already heavily loaded. Tonight, however, nobody volunteers to sleep beneath the wagon. The prairie can keep that particular bedroom. The canvas snaps loudly overhead. Your eyes open. Another gust follows. The wagon rocks. A wooden joint creaks near your shoulder. Then everything settles again. You wait. Nothing breaks. You close your eyes. 30 seconds later, the canvas snaps once more. You begin to suspect that sleep is going to require cooperation from the weather, which is unfortunate because the weather has shown no interest in negotiation. You turn onto your side. The quilt beneath you is thick, but the cold still rises through the wagon floor. You can feel it along your hip and shoulder. You shift again. Someone beside you murmurs without waking. There is nowhere else to go. This position will have to become comfortable through determination. Near the lower edge of the wagon, a faint line of frost has begun forming, where cold air meets moisture from breathing. You touch it carefully. Your fingertip comes away wet and cold. The discovery is slightly unnerving. Winter is not merely outside, it is inches away. Only canvas, blankets, wood, clothing, and trapped body heat separate you from the air beyond. A small piece of trail folklore claimed that sleeping with clothing close to the body could prevent garments from becoming painfully cold before morning. Whether every traveller practiced this is impossible to know, but the logic is excellent. Your coat is already serving as part pillow, part insulation, and part promise that tomorrow you will not have to put on something frozen solid. Boots are kept where they can be found. Nobody wants to search for footwear in darkness if the wagon must be left quickly. The same is true for gloves, and the lantern, and the knife, and the water. Your sleeping area is therefore surrounded by objects arranged less for comfort than necessity. It is not elegant, but elegance has had a difficult journey west. The wind rises again. This time the sound comes from beneath the wagon. A low rushing noise passes under the floorboards, followed by a soft hiss as snow moves against the wheels. You listen carefully. The storm has several voices now. There is the roar above the canvas, the whisper of snow against cloth, the creaking of wood, the occasional dull knock of something shifting outside, the distant call of an animal, and beneath all of it, the breathing of your family. That last sound becomes the one you follow, slow, regular, near. The children are mostly asleep. One coughs, another sighs and turns beneath the blankets. Someone whispers for them to settle. Silence returns. Researchers still disagree about exactly how much sleep emigrants commonly manage during severe storms, because diaries tend to record dramatic weather more readily than the number of hours each person actually rested. What survives clearly is the repeated description of cold, wind, anxiety, and interrupted nights. You do not need a diary to understand interrupted sleep now. You close your eyes again. For a moment you begin drifting. The wagon becomes softer around you. The wind seems farther away. Your thoughts loosen. Then an ox bell rings outside. Once, twice. You wake completely. Everyone listens. Another faint sound follows. The animal is still nearby. Nothing more happens. You breathe out slowly. Again, you try to sleep. The strange thing is that exhaustion should make this easy. You have walked countless miles. You have secured the wagon, gathered fuel, checked animals, fought cold, moved supplies, helped cook supper, and spent hours paying attention to dangers that refuse to become less important, simply because you are tired. Your body wants rest. Your mind wants information. What is happening outside? How deep is the snow? Are the animals secure? Is the fire still alive? Will the canvas hold? Will the trail be visible tomorrow? Every question becomes louder once you close your eyes. You force yourself to think about ordinary things instead. A warm kitchen, a wooden chair, the smell of bread, sunlight through a window, dry socks. Dry socks seem particularly luxurious. You almost laugh. Months ago, perhaps your idea of wealth involved land, opportunity, or a new life in Oregon. Tonight, wealth is warm feet. Another gust arrives. The wagon gives a long groan. You tense, then relax. The bows hold. The ropes hold. The blankets hold their warmth. Gradually, the storm becomes less like a collection of warnings and more like a steady background sound. Your breathing slows. The cold around your face remains sharp, but beneath the quilts your body is warm enough. Someone's shoulder rests against yours. A child's feet are tucked near your legs. The cramped arrangement that seemed irritating earlier now feels useful. Each person becomes part of the insulation. Outside, frost gathers. Snow climbs higher against the wheels. The prairie disappears under darkness and white. Inside, you finally stop trying to predict every sound. One creak becomes ordinary, then another. The canvas snaps. You remain still. Wind presses against the wagon. You breathe. For several minutes, perhaps longer, you hover between waking and sleep. There is no comfortable mattress, no quiet room, no solid wall, only this narrow bed of quilts suspended inches above frozen ground. And yet sleep begins to find you, not deeply, not confidently, but gently. Your last clear thought is that the storm may continue for hours. Your next thought never quite finishes. The wind moves across the prairie, the wagon creaks, and beneath the blankets surrounded by sleeping bodies and the faint warmth you have managed to protect, you finally drift into the uncertain luxury of sleep. Sleep does not last very long. You wake because the wagon has become quieter, not silent. The wind is still moving across the prairie, and snow still brushes against the canvas, but some part of the familiar sound outside has changed. You lie still beneath the blankets and listen. There, a bell, faint, then nothing. You wait. Another sound follows, deeper and heavier, an ox shifting its weight. You remember the animals standing outside in the storm, and suddenly the warmth beneath your quilt feels almost unfair. The oxen have no canvas roof, no pile of blankets, no cup of hot water. They have thick hides, winter coats, large bodies, and instincts built for weather. But they are also exhausted animals that have spent months pulling your household west. Their condition matters for reasons far beyond affection. A basic truth of wagon travel is that draft animals were among the most important possessions an emigrant family owned. Without healthy oxen, a loaded wagon could become almost impossible to move, and replacing lost animals on the trail could be difficult, expensive, or simply impossible. You pull on your coat. It is warmer from being kept close beneath the bedding. That small decision now feels brilliant. Boots come next. They are cold but not frozen stiff. Gloves, scarf, hat. Every layer goes back onto your body while the person beside you asks where you're going. The animals, that is enough explanation. Someone else wakes and decides to come. Nobody goes alone. The wagon flap opens, cold air pours inside and erases the last softness of sleep. You step down into snow much deeper than before. It reaches around your boots immediately. The rope tied between the wagon and the animals is still there. You grip it. The line is crusted with ice. Your gloved hand slides along it as you move forward. The wagon fades behind you after only a few steps. The whiteout is still strong. Visibility may have improved slightly, or perhaps your eyes have simply adjusted to expecting almost nothing. You follow the rope. Soon a dark shape appears, then another. The oxen stand close together, heads lowered, backs coated in snow. Their breath rises in thick clouds. One animal turns toward you. Snow has gathered along its shoulders and across the top of its neck. You brush some away. The hide beneath is cold at the surface, but the animal is still generating plenty of warmth. That is encouraging. You check the legs, the hooves, the yoke area. No obvious injury. The animal shifts and pushes its nose toward your sleeve, perhaps hoping you have brought food. You have. Feed becomes the next problem. The prairie grass is buried. Even where the snow is thinner, grazing is difficult. Hay carried on wagons is limited because hay is bulky, and every pound occupies space that might otherwise hold food, tools, or household goods. Some travellers cut or gathered grass when possible during the journey, but a sudden storm can make that ordinary routine much harder. You bring forward what feed can be spared. The oxen eat slowly. Their jaws move with steady patience. Watching them feels strangely calming. They do not seem interested in predicting tomorrow, they simply eat what is in front of them. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. One lesser-known piece of trail lore suggested that experienced teamsters sometimes judged an ox by subtle habits, such as how eagerly it ate after strain, how steadily it chewed its cud, or whether it stood apart from the team. Such observations were not magical diagnosis, but close attention to animal behavior could warn owners that something was wrong before the problem became obvious. You watch your own team now. One animal eats eagerly, another takes longer. You move closer to the second. Its eyes look clear. Its breathing is regular. Perhaps it is simply tired. That would hardly be surprising. These animals have crossed rivers, climbed grades, pulled through mud, walked through dust, endured heat, insects, rough ground, and now snow. You rub its neck. The ox does not thank you. This is typical. You check the tether. The rope has tightened because snow has accumulated around the stake. You loosen and reset it enough to prevent unnecessary strain while still keeping the animal secure. Another traveller emerges from the white and calls your name. For a moment only his voice exists, then his coat and hat appear through the snow. He's checking his own team. You exchange information. All animals accounted for. One cow has broken loose but was found quickly. A younger ox is shivering. Another family has a little extra feed. The news moves between wagons. Nobody hoards useful information. A debate continues among historians about how often animal losses, rather than dramatic human emergencies, determined whether individual emigrant families could complete their journeys as planned. Diaries make clear that lame, sick, exhausted, or missing livestock could alter travel decisions immediately, though the exact importance varied greatly from company to company. Tonight, the question feels very simple. If these oxen cannot move tomorrow, neither can you. You check the harness equipment stored nearby. Leather stiffens in the cold. Snow has worked into straps and buckles. Anything wet now may freeze harder later. You brush away what you can. The work is slow because gloves make your fingers clumsy, but removing them would be foolish. The wind seems to enjoy punishing exposed skin. You keep the gloves on. A gust sends a stream of loose snow across the animals. They turn their bodies slightly. You notice how naturally they seek the least uncomfortable angle. Their backs face the worst of the weather. Heads lower, bodies draw closer. Instinct has been arranging them while you slept. Still, you improve the shelter where possible. The wagons themselves provide some protection. A canvas sheet is adjusted so it blocks part of the wind without trapping the animals dangerously. Snow is cleared around their legs where drifting has become deepest. Feed is placed where it will not vanish immediately beneath fresh powder. None of this creates comfort. It creates endurance. That is enough. One ox suddenly shakes its entire body. Snow flies from its back and lands across your coat. You stand there covered in the animal's contribution to the evening and decide that gratitude has many forms. The traveller beside you laughs. The sound is brief, but welcome. You laugh too. Then both of you return to work. Another bell rings farther away. Someone calls that the missing cow is secured. Good. The camp remains intact. You take one last look at your team. They are tired. So are you. Their sides rise and fall steadily. Their mouths continue working. They have feed. They have some protection from the wind. They are close enough to the wagon that you can reach them by rope if the whiteout thickens again. For now, you have done what can be done. You follow the line back towards shelter, hand over hand. The wagon appears slowly through the snow. When you climb inside, the warmth feels stronger than before. Someone helps brush snow from your shoulders. You remove the outer layer and settle beneath the quilts again. The children are still asleep. The canvas moves, the wind continues, and outside, only a few yards away, the oxen wait through the same long night, guarding in their own quiet way the possibility that when the storm finally releases the prairie, your wagon may still be able to move west. The possibility of moving west still exists somewhere beyond the storm, but inside the wagon another problem begins quietly. Someone is shivering. At first, that seems ordinary. Everyone has been cold tonight. You have spent hours pulling blankets tighter, warming hands, guarding the fire, and stepping into weather that feels determined to turn every exposed inch of skin into ice. But this shivering is different. It does not ease beneath the quilts. The traveller lying near the wagon wall has been unusually quiet for some time. You reach across the bedding and touch the forehead. Warm. Too warm. The face looks pale in the weak lantern light. Eyes open slowly. For a second there is confusion, then recognition. The traveller says it is nothing. This is exactly what sick people on difficult journeys have been saying since human beings first developed the unfortunate habit of becoming ill at inconvenient times. You ask whether anything hurts. A vague answer. The head, the body, perhaps the throat. There is exhaustion too, but that describes nearly everyone in the wagon. You pull another blanket over the patient. Someone shifts closer to provide warmth. Another person reaches for the water. A sobering reality of overland migration is that illness was one of the greatest dangers emigrants faced. Cholera, dysentery, measles, respiratory infections, fevers and other diseases could spread through groups already weakened by poor water, limited diets, exhaustion, weather, and crowded camps. Tonight, however, disease does not arrive with a name. It arrives as a warm forehead and cold hands. You have no laboratory. No thermometer may be available. No physician is waiting behind the next wagon with a warm office and sensible lighting. Perhaps someone in the train has medical experience. Perhaps not. So knowledge becomes communal. A neighbouring family is asked whether anyone knows what to do. The message travels through the storm. Soon advice returns. Keep the patient warm. Offer water, watch the breathing. Let the person rest. Someone suggests broth. Someone else suggests coffee. A third suggestion involves a medicine bottle that claims to cure an impressive range of human suffering. The bottle is examined. Its confidence is remarkable. Its usefulness is less certain. Frontier medicine can be a curious combination of practical nursing, inherited remedies, commercial preparations, and ideas that future generations will regard with considerable suspicion. One peculiar detail from the period is the popularity of patent medicines that advertise themselves as answers to numerous unrelated complaints. A single bottle might promise relief from fever, stomach trouble, weakness, pain, and almost anything else troubling the purchaser. Very efficient marketing, rather ambitious medicine. Tonight nobody is eager to experiment recklessly. Water seems safer. You lift the patient's head carefully, a few sips, then rest. The cup is set aside where it cannot spill. The wagon has become a sick room without changing shape. Bedding is rearranged again. A box is moved away from the patient's feet. A folded coat becomes a pillow. The person closest to the canvas trades places with someone warmer. Every adjustment creates another small pocket of comfort. Outside, the wind continues hammering the wagon. Inside, voices become softer. The children wake briefly and ask what is happening. You tell them someone is feeling unwell. That is enough information for now. One child offers part of a blanket. The gesture is unnecessary, it is also accepted. The patient smiles weakly. That matters. You touch the forehead again. Still warm. The hands remain colder than you would like. You rub them gently through the blanket. Someone checks the little fire. It needs fuel. Not much remains. That changes this calculation. The patient may need warmth more urgently than anyone else. So a little extra fuel is used. A pot receives snow. The snow melts reluctantly. More is added. Eventually enough hot water exists to warm a cup and perhaps make a thin broth from whatever supplies can be spared. The smell of warm liquid fills the wagon. The patient takes only a little. You do not force more. Rest seems more useful. There is ongoing disagreement among researchers about how effective common emigrant medical practices were in everyday trail conditions, partly because accounts often describe remedies without enough detail to determine whether recovery came from treatment, rest, hydration, chance, or the natural course of illness. You would appreciate certainty. History does not provide it. Neither does the patient. The person sleeps for several minutes, then wakes shivering again. You add another layer. Your own blanket supply is becoming a complicated arrangement of shared corners and borrowed warmth. Nobody complains. A strong gust presses against the wagon. Snow hisses beneath the edge of the canvas. You block the gap with another folded piece of cloth. The patient coughs. Everyone listens. It is only one cough, then another. You exchange glances with the adult beside you. No one says what they are thinking. Respiratory sickness in this weather would be dangerous. So would dehydration. So would simple exhaustion. Nearly everything has become dangerous tonight. You focus on what you can actually do. Warmth, water, rest, observation. You check breathing, slow, regular enough. You ask a simple question. The patient answers clearly. Good. A little more broth is offered. This time more is swallowed. Better. The improvement may be tiny, but tiny improvements are valuable. Outside, a neighbouring traveller calls to ask how things are. You answer that the patient is resting. The voice replies that they have a little dried herb if needed. Another family offers additional cloth for warming. Someone else says they still have a small amount of medicine. The camp is invisible, yet help arrives through voices. You remember how the ropes tied the wagons together earlier. Now care does something similar. No family is completely alone. The patient eventually stops shivering quite so violently. You notice it before anyone speaks. The body relaxes, the face still looks tired. The fever may still be there, but the hands feel slightly warmer. You do not celebrate. The night is not finished. You simply adjust the blanket and sit nearby. The children drift back to sleep. The lantern is lowered. Conversation fades. You remain awake longer than you intended, listening to the patient's breathing beneath the storm. In, out. Pause. Again. The rhythm becomes another sound inside the wagon, as important as the creaking wood and snapping canvas. You think about the road waiting beneath the snow. Tomorrow may require digging, repairing, feeding animals, finding the trail, but those problems belong to tomorrow. Tonight, your world has narrowed again, not to the prairie, not even to the wagon, to one person beneath several blankets, one warm forehead, one cup of water, one slow breath after another. And as the blizzard continues beyond the canvas, you understand that keeping someone alive through a difficult night may depend less on dramatic medicine than on the quiet patience of people who refuse to stop watching. The patient finally settles into a quieter sleep, and for the first time in what feels like hours, nobody inside your wagon is urgently doing anything. You sit beneath the blankets and listen. Wind, canvas, breathing. Then, through all of it, a voice. Someone outside is calling from the next wagon. You lift the flap just enough to hear. They are asking whether the sick traveller needs anything. You answer that the fever seems steadier. A moment later, the voice returns. They have a little extra fuel. Another family has broth. Someone farther down the line has dry cloth. The offers arrive through a storm that has erased nearly every visible sign of the people making them. You cannot see the camp, yet somehow the camp feels closer than it did yesterday. Before the snow, each wagon had its own small world, its own food, its own bedding, its own arguments, its own children, its own collection of useful objects tied, folded, stacked and wedged into every possible corner. Tonight those boundaries soften. Someone brings fuel, you share hot water, another wagon lends a cooking pot because theirs is larger and can melt snow more efficiently. A family with stronger rope helps secure a loose canvas cover nearby. A traveller with better gloves volunteers to check animals for someone whose hands are already painfully cold. One point firmly supported by surviving emigrant accounts is that overland travel depended heavily on cooperation. Families certainly valued independence, but river crossings, repairs, illness, livestock problems, weather and accidents often required several households to work together. The popular image of the solitary pioneer doing absolutely everything alone would look rather strange tonight. You would prefer the pioneer with spare firewood. A shape emerges from the storm outside. It is a neighbour wrapped so completely in coat, scarf and snow that identifying the person takes several seconds. A small bundle is passed into your hands. Dried fuel. Not much. Enough to matter. You thank them. They wave away the gratitude. Another family helped them earlier. That answer becomes a pattern. Someone owes someone else a favour. That person owes another. Eventually, the entire train is connected by a web of small debts nobody is carefully recording. A cup of flour last week, help with a wheel yesterday, an hour watching children during a river crossing, a rope tonight. Perhaps tomorrow it will be your turn again. The storm turns generosity into practical insurance. You add part of the new fuel to the protected pile and keep part for later. Nothing is burned simply because you have more. The habit of caution remains. A little while later, another voice calls. This time the message is almost cheerful. One family has discovered a sack of coffee they thought was nearly empty. There's enough for several cups. This news travels through the wagon train with considerably more enthusiasm than many official announcements would receive. Coffee becomes community policy. Someone prepares a small pot. Fuel is contributed from one wagon, water from another, coffee from a third. The final result is divided among several adults. The portions are tiny. Nobody complains. You hold the warm cup and listen as the person beside you reports that the family 2 wagons away has lost a mitten. Apparently the mitten was last seen near an ox. Nobody knows what the ox has done with it. The story becomes more elaborate each time it is repeated. By the time it reaches the next wagon, the ox is suspected of operating a small clothing business. A smaller curiosity of trail life is that humour appears regularly in diaries written during difficult journeys. People complained, teased, exaggerated, invented nicknames and recorded ridiculous moments alongside illness and danger. Hardship does not eliminate humour. Sometimes it gives humour more work to do. You hear laughter outside. Faint, brief, wonderful. The blizzard remains dangerous, but for several seconds it loses some authority. Another family sends news that their animals are secure. Someone else reports that snow has drifted nearly to a wagon hub. A traveller closer to the edge of camp says the wind may be shifting. Nobody knows whether that means improvement. Still, information moves. That matters. Without visibility, each wagon possesses only a tiny piece of the whole situation. One family knows the animals. Another knows the fuel supply. Another has checked the snow depth. Another has a sick traveller. By sharing what everyone knows, the invisible camp slowly builds a picture of itself. You begin to understand the wagon train as something more than a line of vehicles. It is a moving village. There are no streets, no courthouse, no shop, no church bell. Yet there are neighbours. There are shared resources. There are arguments. There are favours. There are people who know who makes the strongest coffee and who can repair a harness in darkness. There are children who wander between families on ordinary days and adults who appear beside a broken wheel without being asked twice. Researchers continue to discuss how strongly mutual aid shaped the daily experience of emigrant companies compared with ideals of household independence, since surviving sources reflect very different personalities and circumstances. Some travellers describe deep cooperation. Others record disputes, selfishness, fractured companies, and bitter disagreements. Human nature did not become noble merely because everyone headed west. People still argued. Some refused to share. Some complained about leadership. Some abandoned companies and joined others. Some probably spent months wishing they had chosen completely different travelling companions. But tonight, the storm encourages cooperation with impressive efficiency. A loose wagon cover begins snapping somewhere nearby. Several adults respond. You join them. The rope between wagons guides you through the white. When you reach the problem, 3 people are already there. Nobody gives a speech. One holds the canvas, another works the knot. You brace the wagon frame while the line is tightened. Snow strikes your back. The repair takes only a few minutes. Without help, it might have taken much longer. You return along the rope. Back inside, someone hands you the last warm swallow of coffee. Fair payment. The patient is still resting. The children remain bundled beneath quilts. Outside, voices continue moving between wagons. Someone asks for an axe, someone answers. Someone needs dry kindling. A little is sent. A child wakes and wants to know why everyone keeps shouting. You tell them the neighbours are checking on one another. The child thinks about this, then asks whether the neighbour with the missing mitten ever found it. Not yet. This seems far more important. You settle again beneath the blankets. The storm is still strong. The road is still buried. The night is still long. Yet the wagon no longer feels like one fragile shelter standing alone on an empty prairie. Beyond the canvas are other families doing exactly what you are doing, watching, sharing, repairing, waiting. You cannot see them, but you hear them. And in that chain of voices, borrowed tools, shared fuel, weak coffee, and ridiculous stories, the frozen camp becomes a village held together not by buildings, but by people refusing to let the storm isolate them. The frozen camp remains a village only because everyone keeps answering. A voice calls through the storm, another replies. Then silence returns for a while, filled by the long pressure of wind against canvas. You have stopped wondering whether the blizzard will end soon. Soon has become a useless word. The night feels larger than ordinary time. There is only the next gust, the next check of the blankets, the next handful of fuel, the next cup of water, the next moment when everyone listens because some sound outside has changed. You shift beneath the quilts. The wagon floor seems colder than it did an hour ago. Perhaps the temperature has fallen. Perhaps exhaustion simply makes everything feel colder. Your feet are wrapped well, but your toes still remind you that winter is waiting beneath the boards. Someone reaches toward the protected fuel supply. The pile is smaller, noticeably smaller. Nobody comments. There is no need. You all saw it. A little fuel goes to the fire, not enough for comfort, enough to preserve the ember. The flame rises reluctantly, glows orange for several minutes, then settles low again. You hold your hands toward it. The warmth barely reaches your fingers before the wind steals most of it. Severe plain storms could create dangerous drifting because strong winds carried loose snow across open country and piled it wherever wagons, animals, vegetation, or uneven ground interrupted the flow. Your wagon has become exactly such an obstacle. Snow is gathering around the wheels. Earlier it reached the lower rims. Now it presses higher. Someone checks through the opening and reports that the drift on one side is approaching the wagon bed. That is not encouraging. The snow itself may provide a little protection from wind near the lower boards, but too much accumulation can trap wheels, block access, bury equipment, and make departure difficult when the weather finally improves. You pull on gloves again. Another check outside is necessary. The rope feels harder now beneath your hand. Ice coats the fibers. You follow it carefully. The storm strikes immediately. Snow drives against your face so densely that breathing toward the wind becomes unpleasant. You turn your head sideways. The wagon disappears behind you almost at once. The drift along its side has grown into a smooth white slope. You push a boot into it. The snow reaches nearly to your knee. Farther toward the wheel, it is deeper. You begin clearing only what is necessary. There is no point fighting the entire prairie. The prairie has considerably more snow than you have energy. You uncover part of the wheel. Another person joins you. Together you clear enough space to prevent the wagon from becoming completely buried along one side. Within minutes, loose snow begins returning. You stare at it. The storm appears unimpressed by your work. A strange bit of winter folklore claimed that people could sometimes estimate worsening cold by the sound of snow beneath their boots, with drier snow producing a sharper squeak in lower temperatures. Whether anyone tonight pauses to conduct such an experiment is another matter. You already possess a perfectly adequate temperature instrument. Your face hurts. That seems precise enough. You return inside. Snow is brushed from your coat. Your gloves are damp around the edges. They are placed near warmth, carefully, not close enough to scorch. The patient wakes. The fever remains, but the shivering has eased. A little water is given. Someone checks the children. All warm enough. The smallest child has somehow rotated sideways beneath the blankets and now occupies the space of a much larger person. Nobody moves them. Sleep is too valuable. Outside, the oxen shift. A bell sounds. Then quiet. You imagine snow gathering on their backs again. You will check them soon. Not yet. For 5 minutes, you allow yourself to remain still. That becomes 10. The wind continues. One gust presses the canvas so far inward that everyone looks up. The wooden bow strains. A rope groans, then the canvas lifts back into place. Nobody speaks until the next gust passes. The structure holds. Again. How many times can you say again before it begins to feel like the entire night? Again the wind. Again the snow. Again the fire needs feeding. Again someone wants water. Again the blankets need adjusting. Again a rope must be checked. Again you listen for animals. Again you wait. Students of Western migration continue to debate how accurately later memoirs capture the duration and intensity of particular storms, since recollections written decades afterward could compress several events or magnify the most frightening portions of a journey. But memory does not need perfect measurements to preserve one truth. Some nights feel endless. This is one of them. The fuel is counted once more. Enough remains if everyone is careful, not generous. Enough. That word now feels beautiful. Enough food, enough water, enough blankets, enough strength, enough fire. You do not need abundance. You need the night to demand slightly less than what you still possess. A neighbour call. The wind makes the first message impossible to understand. They repeat it. The gusts may be shifting. You lift your head. Everyone listens. At first, the claim seems optimistic. The storm sounds exactly as terrible as before. Then you notice something. The canvas is no longer snapping from the same direction. Snow that had been pushing beneath one edge now strikes more heavily against another. A change. Small, perhaps meaningless. Still, the adults exchange looks. Someone checks outside. The report returns. Visibility is still terrible. Snow is still blowing hard. But the wind has turned slightly. Nobody says the storm is ending. That would be tempting fate. And after months on the trail, you have developed a respectful relationship with tempting fate. Instead, you say only that something is different. The children sleep through this historic development. One snores softly. You envy that level of confidence. The little fire glows. The patient breathes steadily. A cup sits beside the bedding. Beyond the wagon, the other families remain invisible but present. The night continues, yet now you listen differently. Every few minutes you test the wind in your mind. Is it weaker? Perhaps, then stronger again. No certainty. But the direction has shifted. That is enough to create hope. Not celebration, not relief. Only a small loosening inside your chest. You lean back against the bedding and close your eyes. The longest part of the night may still be ahead, or perhaps it is already behind you. There is no way to know. So you wait beneath the canvas, surrounded by tired breathing and dwindling supplies, while snow climbs against the wheels and the prairie remains lost beyond the darkness. And for the first time in hours, the wind seems to be considering another direction. The wind does not stop. It simply grows tired. At first, the change is so slight that you suspect you are imagining it. The canvas still trembles. Snow still brushes against the wagon. Cold still presses through every seam. But the great roar outside has softened. There are pauses now, small spaces between gusts. You lie beneath the blankets and notice them one by one. Wind. Silence. Wind again. Then another silence. Someone near the wagon opening notices too. Nobody announces that the storm is over. After a night like this, people become careful with hopeful sentences. Instead, someone lifts the canvas flap. Pale light enters. Morning. The word feels almost surprising. You've spent so long inside darkness and blowing snow that daylight seems like something belonging to another journey. You sit up slowly. Your body objects immediately. Shoulders ache. Legs feel stiff. Your neck has spent several hours in a position no reasonable piece of furniture would recommend. Around you, the others begin waking. A child blinks, looks toward the light, and asks whether the pancakes have arrived. You almost admire the commitment. The patient opens tired eyes. The fever has not vanished, but the face looks calmer. Water is offered. Then you turn toward the opening again. Outside is white, not the violent white wall of the night. This white is still, soft, enormous. You step down carefully. Your boot sinks deep before finding solid ground. The prairie you knew yesterday no longer exists. A dependable truth of severe prairie storms is that wind-driven snow can reshape open ground dramatically, piling deep drifts around wagons, animals, vegetation and shallow depressions, while leaving nearby patches much thinner. You see that pattern everywhere. One side of your wagon is buried almost to the bed. The other side shows part of the wheel. A rope disappears into a smooth drift and reappears several feet away. A cooking pot lies half-covered near the wagon tongue. You do not remember leaving it there. Perhaps the wind moved it. Perhaps someone set it down during the night. The storm has rearranged camp without asking permission. You take several steps away from the wagon. For the first time in hours, you can see another family clearly. Their wagon stands under a heavy cap of snow. A man emerges, looks around, and simply stares. You understand. Wagons appear farther away than you remember because drifts have changed the ground between them. Some wheels are nearly buried. Boxes left beneath wagon beds are hidden completely. A length of rope hangs from a stake at an odd angle. A mitten has finally been found, frozen against a wheel. Someone calls this evidence against the ox accused of stealing it. Small objects scattered after storms appear often in travel recollections because camps contain so many loose necessities. Pans, tools, cloth, harness pieces, buckets and firewood could be shifted, buried, or simply become difficult to locate once snow covered the ground. The missing objects are annoying. The missing trail is worse. You turn west, then east. Nothing. Yesterday, wagon ruts cut across the prairie like rough lines pointing toward the next camp. Now the surface is smooth except for drifts and the marks made by people moving around this morning. You know the trail lies somewhere beneath your feet. Knowing that and seeing it are very different things. Several travellers gather and study the land. The light is weak. Clouds still cover most of the sky. Without clear sun, even direction feels less certain. A low rise that served as a reference point yesterday has vanished into the pale distance. Grass tops poke through in scattered places. Everything else is snow. Some historians remain divided over how frequently fresh snowfall caused emigrant parties to lose the precise trace of the established route for meaningful periods, since many companies could recover direction from terrain, landmarks, compass bearings, prior knowledge, or the tracks of other travellers once conditions improved. This morning, none of those methods feels immediate. The prairie looks newly made. You glance toward the animals. The oxen are standing. That is the first good news. They look exhausted. Snow lies across their backs, though much has fallen away as they shift and shake themselves. One animal chews slowly. Another lowers its head toward a patch where grass may be hidden beneath the snow. Steam rises from their nostrils. You approach carefully. Their legs are free enough to move. No animal appears missing. No obvious injury reveals itself. Someone begins checking the teams one by one. Names are called. Counts are repeated. Every animal accounted for feels like another piece of mourning restored. A cow farther down the line gives a low complaint. The sound carries surprisingly well now that the wind has weakened. You realize how quiet the prairie has become. After hours of roaring weather, ordinary silence feels almost loud. You hear boots crunching, leather creaking, and a child laughing somewhere behind a wagon. The noises are separate again. You walk toward the edge of camp, not far. The snow depth changes every few steps. Here it reaches above your ankle, there it climbs toward your knee. Then suddenly it becomes shallow enough that dead grass shows through. The unevenness makes walking awkward. Every step becomes a question. Solid ground? Hidden rut? Drift? You proceed slowly. Someone points toward a darker patch in the distance. Perhaps that is exposed grass. Perhaps the trail passes near it. Another traveller disagrees. A compass is brought out. People compare memory. Where was the last rise? Which direction had the wagons been angled before stopping? Where did the sun set before the sky vanished? Each answer helps slightly. None solves everything. A curious belief among some plains travellers held that animals could sometimes help recover a familiar route, because teams remembered habitual direction or the feel of a trail. Whether that instinct could truly be trusted after a major storm is questionable, and nobody seems eager to hand navigation entirely to an ox. The ox, for its part, looks uninterested in promotion. You return toward the wagon. The children are awake now. One peers outside and gasps at the drifts. To a child, the transformed camp looks almost magical. To the adults, it looks like work, a great deal of work, but not yet. For several minutes, everyone simply looks. You survived the night. The canvas held. The patient is breathing. The animals are standing. The neighbouring families answer when called. Those facts matter more than the buried wheels. The sun remains hidden, but the daylight strengthens slowly. Shapes become clearer. The white prairie stretches outward beneath a pale sky. Beautiful in the calm way dangerous things often become once they stop moving. Somewhere below that smooth surface lies the road west. You cannot see it. You cannot yet follow it, but you know it is there. And as morning settles over the battered camp, the first task is no longer surviving the storm. It is understanding what the storm has left behind. Understanding what the storm has left behind quickly becomes less important than moving it. The camp wakes fully. Blankets are folded back, coats are pulled on, boots are tightened. Children are given small jobs while adults begin staring at wheels, ropes, canvas, animals, and the enormous amount of snow now occupying places where useful things used to be. You step beside the wagon and push a shovel into the drift. The first load is heavy, not because the snow itself weighs much, but because there is so much of it. You throw it aside, then another, then another. The work becomes rhythmic. Dig, lift, turn, throw. Your shoulders begin warming almost immediately. After spending the night trying desperately to preserve heat, it is almost insulting how quickly physical labour produces too much of it. You loosen your scarf slightly. Someone warns you not to remove too many layers. Sweat can become dangerous once you stop moving, so you keep working carefully. A practical fact of overland travel is that wagons required constant maintenance even in good weather. Wheels loosened, spokes cracked, canvas tore, ropes wore thin, and iron fittings shifted under months of vibration and strain. After a severe storm, checking equipment before moving again becomes essential. You reach the first wheel. Half of it is buried. Snow is packed tightly around the lower rim and beneath the wagon bed. You dig until the spokes are visible, then farther. The axle is inspected, no obvious break. Good. You move to the next wheel. Another adult clears snow from the opposite side. Children carry smaller amounts away in pans because every shovel is already in use. One child treats the task as a competition. Another abandons the competition after 3 trips and begins supervising. The supervisor appears very confident. You tell them management is full for today. The child returns to carrying snow. Nearby, a family discovers that one of their wagon covers has torn near a fastening point. The damage is not catastrophic, but it cannot be ignored. Cold wind would find the opening quickly if another storm arrives. Needle and heavy thread appear. A patch of cloth is found. The repair begins while other people keep digging. Across camp, someone tests a wheel by rocking it gently. Another person tightens rope around a load that shifted during the night. A box is uncovered beneath a drift, then a bucket, then a wooden spoon that nobody remembers losing. The prairie is returning belongings one at a time. One amusing detail from trail life is that emigrants sometimes abandoned household goods when wagons became too heavy, leaving chairs, trunks, stoves, books, and other possessions beside the route. After a storm like this, however, the first challenge is determining which objects were intentionally discarded and which merely disappeared under snow. You find a small stool several yards from the wagon. Nobody claims to have placed it there. The wind apparently redecorated. You carry it back. Then someone calls for help. A neighbouring wheel is stuck deeper than expected. Several people gather. Snow is cleared from beneath the rim. The ground underneath has frozen unevenly. A pry bar is brought. One person pushes. Another steadies the wagon. You add your weight. The wheel shifts slightly. Again. This time it moves. A cheer rises. It is not a large victory, but after the night you have had, people are willing to celebrate cooperative wheel movement. Work continues. The animals are checked again. Harness is examined for stiffness. Leather straps are warmed carefully in the hands before being bent. Ice is knocked from buckles. A cracked strap is replaced. Feed is offered. The oxen eat slowly, watching the human activity with the expression of creatures who suspect they will eventually be asked to participate. They are correct, not yet. First, camp must become movable. The sick traveller remains inside the wagon, still weak but awake. Water is given. A little food follows. The fever seems lower. You allow yourself to believe this is improvement without demanding certainty. Another family offers to watch the children for a while. The children object because digging is apparently exciting now that someone else might do it. This enthusiasm would have been useful earlier. You send them to gather exposed fuel and recover small objects near the wagons. They return with rope, cloth, a spoon, 2 sticks, and something nobody recognizes. The unidentified object is placed in a box for future archaeological study. Among historians, there is continuing discussion about how often severe weather forced emigrant families to abandon possessions immediately rather than attempt repairs or recovery. Journals describe both careful salvage and ruthless decisions to lighten loads depending on season, animal strength, terrain, and how urgently a company needed to move. Your own family faces that decision now. One wooden box has been damaged by moisture. Another item is heavier than it is useful. A chair is cracked. The wagon already carries too much. You stand beside the damaged belongings and consider them differently than you would have months ago. At the beginning of the journey, possessions still felt connected to the life you had left. Furniture meant home. Books meant memory. Tools meant security. Now every object must justify its weight. Can you use it? Can you eat it? Can it keep someone warm? Can it repair something more important? If not, perhaps the prairie receives another gift. The broken chair is examined. One useful piece of wood can become fuel. Another can be saved for repairs. The rest remains behind. It feels strange, not tragic, just strange. The journey has been teaching you to reduce the meaning of ownership. Sometimes survival means carrying less. By midday, sunlight begins pressing faintly through the clouds. Not bright, but enough to make the snow glitter in places. People stop occasionally and look west. The trail is still uncertain, though scouts have begun checking the most likely direction. There is no hurry to start moving before the wagons are ready. A damaged wheel 10 miles from here would be worse than waiting another hour. So everything is checked again. Canvas tight, ropes secure, boxes wedged, food protected, water available, bedding dry enough, axles sound, harness usable, animals fed, people accounted for, the patient resting. You walk around the wagon one final time. It looks battered. Snow clings to the lower boards, mud and ice mark the wheels. The canvas patch is visible. One rope has been replaced, several objects are gone, yet the wagon stands. More importantly, it can move. Across camp the same transformation has taken place. What looked like a frozen collection of buried shelters at dawn now resembles a wagon train again. Not quite ready, but close. You look at the trail ahead, hidden somewhere beneath the white prairie. Yesterday, that road carried you west. Last night, it disappeared. Today, you must find it again. You place the shovel inside the wagon. Someone calls that the lead teams are nearly ready. The oxen lift their heads. Children climb into position. Adults exchange tired looks. There is still snow to cross. There are still miles to travel. But the wheels are free. The canvas is repaired. The camp is standing. And after hours of digging, lifting, checking, mending, and deciding what must be left behind, the wagon train is finally becoming something capable of movement once more. The wagon train is capable of movement again, but capable does not mean eager. The oxen stand in their yokes beneath a pale morning sky, steam rising from their nostrils while people make the final checks. Snow still covers nearly everything. The trail remains more memory than road, and every wagon wheel seems to understand that the first turn will require persuasion. You take your place beside the wagon. Someone calls from the front. The teams lean forward. Leather tightens. Wood creaks. For several seconds your wagon does not move at all. The oxen pull harder. A wheel turns perhaps an inch, then another. Packed snow breaks beneath the iron rim with a deep crunch. The wagon lurches forward. Inside, boxes shift despite being secured. A child gives a startled laugh. You walk beside the wheel and watch it climb slowly out of the place where it spent the night. One revolution, then another. The wagon is moving west again. Not quickly. Nobody expects quickly. A well-documented feature of overland migration was the remarkably modest pace of wagon travel. Emigrant parties often covered only a few miles an hour while moving, and difficult ground, weather, river crossings, illness, or weakened animals could reduce daily progress dramatically. Today, even 1 mile feels ambitious. Snow conceals the familiar ruts. The lead travellers search for exposed grass, shallow depressions, remembered landmarks, and any sign that reveals where the established route passes. A compass helps confirm direction. Experience fills the remaining gaps. The first wagon makes tracks. The second wagon follows. By the time your wheels reach the same ground, a rough road is beginning to exist again. You step into the footprints of the person ahead whenever possible. It saves energy. Your legs already ache from digging. The snow reaches above your ankles in some places, then suddenly deepens toward your knees. Each hidden drift demands another effort. You begin to appreciate yesterday's dusty trail. Dust now seems charming, almost luxurious. You would happily accept enough dust to coat every plate you own if it meant seeing the ground again. The oxen pull steadily. Their pace is slower than usual. You watch their breathing. No animal is pushed harder than necessary. The storm has already taken enough strength from them. Stopping again because an exhausted ox collapses would accomplish nothing. So the train proceeds with patience. A stretch of shallow snow allows the wagons to move more easily. For a few minutes, wheels turn almost normally. The familiar creaking rhythm returns. You had heard that sound every day for months and occasionally wished it would stop. Now it feels comforting. Creak, roll, crunch, creak. A wheel drops suddenly. The wagon tilts. Everyone freezes. You look down. A rut lies hidden beneath the snow. The wheel has fallen directly into it. Oddly enough, this is good news. You have found the trail. Someone laughs. The rut that nearly throws a cooking pot across the wagon is greeted like an old friend. A curious observation appears in several emigrant recollections, where travellers describe recognisable wagon tracks with almost affectionate familiarity after periods of uncertainty. Deep ruts could be difficult to travel through, yet they also confirmed that thousands of wheels had passed the same way before. Your wheel climbs free. The wagon continues. Ahead, sunlight begins slipping through breaks in the clouds. The landscape changes with it. Snow that looked flat and grey now glitters. Tiny points of brightness appear across the prairie. The sky becomes a softer blue toward the west. For the first time since the storm began, you can see farther than the next few wagons. A low ridge emerges. Someone recognises it. Another traveller confirms the shape. That small landmark restores confidence immediately. The route is right. You keep moving. The children are quieter today. Even they seem tired by the storm. One sits inside near the sick traveller, who remains wrapped in blankets but is awake. The fever appears weaker. There is conversation now. That is encouraging. A cup of water is passed carefully. Someone asks whether pancakes are still being considered. Apparently, the breakfast promise has survived the blizzard better than several pieces of equipment. You suggest that pancakes may require a less adventurous morning. This answer is received with disappointment. The wagon creaks onward. The snow produces a strange silence around the train. Ordinary prairie travel is full of sounds. Hooves, wheels, voices, chains, birds, grass. Today, snow absorbs much of it. Even conversation feels softer. You hear the breathing of the oxen more clearly than usual. The iron rims make a dull grinding sound rather than the sharp rattle heard on hard ground. Now and then, snow falls from a wagon cover with a gentle slide. Researchers still discuss how much particular winter storms delayed individual wagon companies, because surviving journals vary greatly in detail, and later memories sometimes combine several difficult weather events. What is certain is that even short delays could matter when emigrants were already racing the season toward western destinations. You understand that urgency. Every day of autumn matters. Grass will become harder to find. Nights will grow colder. Mountain routes may become more dangerous. The instinct is to hurry. The reality is that hurrying an exhausted team through hidden snow is a foolish way to lose a wheel, an animal, or both. So patience wins. The train moves perhaps a mile, then another. A stop is called. Harness is checked. The animals rest. People drink. Nobody complains about the pause. You stand beside the wagon and look backward. Tracks now stretch behind you across the white prairie. For the first time since yesterday, there is a visible road. Your road. Wheels have pressed dark lines through the snow. Boot prints cluster beside them. Hoof marks fill the spaces between. The storm erased the trail. The wagon train has drawn it again. You turn west. The country ahead remains white, but it no longer looks endless. Dark grass appears on exposed rises. The clouds are breaking slowly. A thin band of light rests near the horizon. You begin walking again when the teams receive the signal. This time the wagon starts more easily. The wheels find the fresh tracks. The oxen settle into their familiar rhythm. Your boots follow. Each sound becomes reassuring. The creak of wood, the pull of leather, the soft command to the team. Even the rattle of cookware seems welcome. Normal noises, ordinary problems, a journey continuing. You think briefly of the previous night, when the wagon stood buried beneath darkness and snow and nobody knew what morning would reveal. Now the storm lies behind you, not far behind. You can still see the drifts around the abandoned campsite. But distance is beginning to grow, one careful wheel turn at a time. You keep walking beside the wagon as sunlight spreads across the snow. The prairie is cold. The animals are tired. The road remains difficult. Yet each slow mile carries you farther from the place where the wind stopped everything. And after a night when survival meant remaining still, there is something deeply comforting about simply moving west again. Moving west again feels almost ordinary by afternoon. That may be the strangest part. Yesterday the prairie vanished beneath a white wall. During the night the wagon shook beneath wind strong enough to make every rope and wooden bow feel precious. You counted fuel by handfuls, listened for ox bells through darkness, watched over a feverish traveller, and wondered whether the road itself would still exist by morning. Now wheels are turning, slowly, patiently. The wagon creaks beside you with the same familiar complaint it has made across hundreds of miles. You place one hand against the sideboard as you walk. The wood feels solid. That simple sensation brings unexpected comfort. For months the wagon has seemed too small, too crowded, too noisy. Every possession must fit inside it. Every blanket occupies space needed by something else. Children climb over boxes. Cooking pots knock together whenever a wheel finds a rut. Dust enters through openings you were certain had been closed. You've probably spent half the journey wishing the wagon were larger. After the blizzard, you look at it differently. A basic truth of the great overland migrations is that most covered wagons were practical transport vehicles rather than comfortable travelling houses. Families often walked beside them while the interior carried food, tools, bedding, clothing, children when necessary, and anyone too sick or exhausted to continue on foot. Yet yesterday that transport vehicle became your shelter. The canvas kept most of the snow outside. The wooden bed lifted you above frozen ground. The bows held beneath the wind. The blankets trapped warmth. The boxes blocked drafts. Even the cramped interior helped because everybody contributed heat. Nothing about it was luxurious. It was enough. You understand now how powerful that word can be. Enough. The wagon reaches another shallow drift. The oxen lean forward. One wheel climbs, the second follows. You push beside the rear wheel until the wagon settles onto firmer ground. Inside, the sick traveller is sitting upright. That is new. The face remains tired, but the eyes are clearer. Someone offers water. The cup is accepted without argument. Another good sign. A child asks whether being healthy enough to complain about the water means pancakes are possible. The entire wagon considers this medical theory. You decide the evidence is promising. Laughter follows. It is soft laughter, because everyone is tired, but it changes the atmosphere immediately. The storm is becoming a story, not yet an old story. Not yet something anyone can describe without remembering the cold. But already it is beginning to move behind you in time as well as distance. One of the more endearing details found in emigrant diaries is the attention given to small comforts after difficult stretches of travel. A better meal, dry clothing, a repaired shoe, a warm camp, or even a familiar song could receive several grateful lines after pages describing exhausting miles. You understand why. Grand ideas become less important after enough hardship. You do not dream of monuments. You dream of dry socks. You dream of a fire that does not need guarding every second. You dream of letting the children sleep without checking their faces for cold. Perhaps you even dream of those pancakes. The sun lowers gradually. Its light spreads across the snow in long pale bands. The prairie no longer seems hostile. It looks almost peaceful. That feels slightly unfair. A landscape capable of producing last night's chaos should perhaps look guilty for at least another day. Instead, the sky clears. Blue appears between thinning clouds. Snow glitters. The wind becomes little more than a cold breeze. You turn and look backward. The wagon tracks continue east until distance swallows them. Somewhere beyond sight is the place where you stopped. The buried camp. The tiny fire. the rope stretching into white darkness, the neighbour carrying fuel, the ox standing patiently beneath snow, the missing mitten frozen beside a wheel. All of it belongs to the same prairie now lying calm behind you. There is still debate among historians about how individual emigrant families emotionally understood the wagon itself during long journeys. Surviving letters and memoirs can describe wagons as tools, burdens, shelters, symbols of migration, or simply ordinary objects so familiar that writers barely mention them. For you tonight there is no uncertainty. The wagon is home, not forever. Perhaps not even for many more weeks. But home does not always mean a building waiting permanently in one place. Sometimes home is simply the place where the people you love are protected. The place containing your blankets, your food, your ridiculous collection of useful scraps. The place where someone knows which cup belongs to whom. The place where a child can wake during a blizzard, ask a question, and hear a familiar voice answer from 3 feet away. You walk beside the wagon as evening approaches. The wheels sound steadier now. The animals have found a manageable pace. Nobody pushes them. A camp will be made before darkness becomes complete. This time the location is chosen with more attention than usual. A little shelter from the wind. Some exposed ground. Enough nearby fuel to make everyone noticeably happier. The wagons stop. The oxen are released from their immediate work and cared for. People begin the familiar camp routine. Only now every action feels changed by what happened. Canvas ropes receive an extra check. Fuel is collected with unusual enthusiasm. Blankets are inspected before sunset. Water is secured. Someone makes certain the lantern is easy to reach. Experience has rewritten the routine. The little fire begins. Tonight it catches more easily. There is no violent wind trying to flatten the flame. You watch orange light spread through the fuel. Someone puts a pot near the heat. A child asks the important question. Pancakes? This time the answer is yes. Not perfect pancakes. Not generous pancakes. But enough flour remains, and after last night, nobody's going to argue against a small celebration. The first one cooks unevenly. The second is better. The third disappears before anyone can evaluate it properly. Warm food passes between tired hands. The sick traveller manages a small portion. You sit beside the wagon and eat slowly. Behind you, the canvas glows amber from the firelight. It does not look fragile anymore. It looks familiar. You remember how close the cold was during the night, only inches beyond the cloth, and yet warmth survived inside. That memory stays with you. Perhaps that is what the journey keeps teaching. Not that you can conquer the prairie, you cannot. Not that preparation removes danger, it does not. Only that people can make small spaces of warmth inside enormous uncertainty. A blanket, a cup, a fire, a rope, a voice answering through snow, a wagon that keeps moving. And as the evening settles over the white prairie, you lean against the wooden wheel and realize that the warmest thing you carried through the blizzard was never simply the fire. It was the little world gathered beneath the canvas, the people, the habits, the familiar voices, the quiet certainty that when the wind became too loud, someone beside you was still there. The fire burns lower now. The children have finished eating. The oxen stand quietly beyond the wagons. Night comes gently this time. There is no wall of snow rushing across the prairie, no canvas snapping violently overhead. Only the occasional soft movement of air through dry grass showing above the melting edges of snow. You climb into the wagon once more. The same blankets are waiting, the same boards beneath you, the same canvas overhead. Yet everything feels softer tonight. You settle slowly. There is no need to listen for every sound. The creak of the wagon is only wood cooling in the evening air. The faint movement outside is only an ox shifting its feet. Somewhere nearby, another family speaks quietly around their fire. Their voices drift across the camp and fade. You pull the blanket higher. Warmth gathers beneath it. Your breathing slows. The road west can wait until morning. There will be more miles, more rivers, more hills, perhaps more cold nights. But none of those things are here yet. Here there is only the dim interior of the wagon, the gentle breathing of your family, and the deep tiredness that arrives when fear has finally released its grip. The storm is behind you now. The tracks it left will soften. The snow will melt. The wagon ruts will appear again. And eventually even this night will become something remembered beside us the fire, perhaps many years from now, when the prairie exists only in stories. For now you do not need the story, you only need rest. Let the wagon become still around you. Let the cold remain outside. Let the voices fade. The canvas rises and settles with the lightest breeze. Someone turns beneath a blanket. Then quiet returns. Your eyes close. The white prairie stretches beneath the stars, calm at last, while inside the wagon there is warmth enough, shelter enough, and one more peaceful night waiting to carry you toward morning. And as the fire beyond the canvas dims to a soft red glow, you allow the road, the snow, the wind, and every distant mile still waiting ahead to drift gently away. You are warm, you are sheltered, the wagon is still, and for tonight, that is enough. Sweet dreams.